So first, I'd like to take a moment to say that eQuo is founded on core principles of diversity, equality, inclusion, and mutual respect, which we believe are important cultural values at the heart of our community. eQuo recognizes that our work and the work of our community partners is conducted on the inherent and treaty lands of diverse Indigenous cultures and nations across Canada. And I just wanted to say that finding meaningful ways to be able to work together and to contribute to the strength of Canada and with rural and urban Indigenous communities is one of our primary goals at eQuo. So I'd like to get started next by welcoming a really, really special guest, Chris Carter. I've known Chris for a long time. I first met him at his company Thin Data, which at that time was the largest email service provider in Canada. He grew the organization from 2 to over 120 people. And then it was acquired by Transcontinental, and he helped grow it further from there. Since then, he's been an advisor and an investor to many companies, including eQuo, among them Ollie Sport, Altex, Blade, Advisor Stream, naming just a few. He was also recently, he became a venture partner with ENTR Canada. And ironically, though, in spite of all of this, many of you have really come to know Chris in his current position as Executive Director, Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Schulich School of Business. It's a newly established office that's leading the development of accelerator and incubator services of the school and its various programs. And they've been building new partnerships throughout the entire much wider innovation ecosystem and designing innovation-centric work integrated learning programs. And the office has continued the expansion of the Schulich startup community, which now supports more than 150 student alumni companies. So welcome, Chris. It's fantastic to have you on board. I also, on a personal note, Chris is one of the special advisors for me with eQuo, and he was one of the very, very first people who I approached with the very concept of eQuo, and he's been instrumental for me. So I just want to start by just having you share a little bit of your journey, your thoughts on entrepreneurship. You've explored so many different areas. But some of my favorite stories that you've told me were how you started Thin Data. And so I wanted to kind of start there. How did that come about? And how did you manage at a time when it really was the Wild West to not only build an incredible company, but to build an incredible company that was pioneering when it came to emails and loyalty programs?
Well, thanks, Barry. Thanks for the introduction, and excited to have time with the group here today. We'll have a nice, intimate conversation, and I'm looking forward to lots of questions from the group as well. When I started out, believe it or not, it was 1995 when I started my first company, and the impetus for that, a lot of people create something because they have a moment where they're seeing a specific opportunity or there's a problem that they're trying to solve. My problem I was trying to solve was that I didn't want to move out of Toronto. I was a journalism graduate from Ryerson, and the traditional path is to go off to other parts of the country and to small towns and small town newspapers and slowly work your way back across the course of like 10 or 15 years until you're finally working for the Toronto Star. At least that was the path back then. I didn't want to leave. So I thought, you know what? Like one of the ways I wouldn't have to leave and I could still work in journalism if I made my own publication. And I created the whole, business plan for everything, and then got to a point where I realized I couldn't afford paper. And that was like this is the moment where things turned to digital and technology and the path that I wound up on. But I couldn't afford paper. But a great friend of mine, who also one of the participants here today, Slava Powell, who's an awesome entrepreneur himself, is in the audience. He knows as well too. Chancellor is my friend working at one of the publications, and he said, "We don't need paper, man. We put the whole thing, on the internet." And I was like amazed to think that we would start publishing without paper. Now, I wasn't quite ready to do the project, and he had gone off and I had gone off our separate ways. And then I guess this is my first great entrepreneurial moment where there's no, think of this time, there's no LinkedIn, there's no Facebook, there's no, few of us have email accounts. Most people don't have cell phones at that point in time in 1995. So I actually had to sit with the phone book, the Toronto phone book, and call Crawford's. His name's Chancellor Crawford. Call Crawford's for 4 days until I finally found his mom under the L's, Louise. And she got on the phone, and I just was randomly asking people, do you know this guy? He's 6'7". He used to have a mohawk. He's a techie. His name's Chancellor. And I got hung up on like a billion times. And finally I found his mom, and she said, yeah, he's here. He lives with me. That's why you can't find him in the phone book. And put him on the phone. And I told him, like, hey, I want to do that thing that you were talking about, how you could make magazines with no paper. And then he said, come over to my house and I'll show it to you. And I went over to his house and he showed me the internet for the first time there in his bedroom. I saw hotwired.com and I asked him a billion questions. Could it be like this? Could it be like that? What if it worked like this? And then finally I asked, the key question was, can you make these things? And he said, yeah, I make them in my spare time. I make web pages. And that was like the beginning of what became our magazine. And lots of adventures along that early path, but within a very short period of time, we had built it and sold it to Telemedia, the radio network, and it became the founding website for the Fan 590, the sports radio station. And so that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial adventures and and how I came into it. Back then, what's really, interesting compared to now is that there, like angel network groups, no. Accelerators, non-existent. VCs, you'd have to go hunting and get some, cryptic referral into a network that no one knew existed. Startup advisors, everything was being built completely from scratch by like a handful of people. Most of the, successful people in the city were really centered around building internet service providers, ISPs. And dial up, modem connections into homes for people to consume the internet, and then little pop-ups of types of digital businesses around the way. So those were really interesting times, and no one knew what you were talking about. I'd call companies and they'd say, like, I'd explain the internet and they'd say, like, we already bought computers last year, and they'd hang up on me, right? Like there was just so complete and utter confusion as to what anybody was talking about in this space, that most of the banks didn't get it. And in fact, one of my famous stories, I had to go ride the elevator at the Royal Bank to get $100,000 because no one would talk to me on the phone or answer my calls in any other way.
I always love that story. Maybe just for the sake of everybody, can you talk about what happened? Because you literally, I don't think you invented the elevator pitch, but you certainly perfected it. Can you walk through? Because that's one of my favorite stories that I've heard you tell me.
Well, the elevator story is that Chancellor and I had won one of our first key 2 or 3 contracts, and we had staff for the first time, a small number of staff, but we were having to pay them faster than these like corporate clients were like sending their checks, because a lot of them was taking 60 to 90 days to pay, and I needed some money to cash flow that. But the banks, I'd gone to the local branch and I'd gone to, like, I called, they did have a website, I filled in the form, like nothing was working in terms of getting anybody's attention and in terms of this. So I went down to the Royal Bank Tower, the Golden Tower, and I put on my best suit and I walked in. I went to small business banking on the 4th floor. And then every time that somebody who looked like they might be important got into the elevator, then I get in the elevator with them and I pitch them the story of the company. And sometimes they were going up and I had like 10, 12, 13, 14 floors to pitch. And sometimes they were going down to get coffee. And unfortunately, it was the 4th floor. So I only had 4 floors to pitch. And often when I'm in class now at Schulich, I will, like, just joking around with the students, if I tell that story, I'll ask them, like, so how many days do you think I had to stay in the elevator before somebody gave me the money? And I get these great guesses that are like 4 weeks. You came back every day for 4 weeks, not giving up. And the truth is that it only took telling the story 12 times that morning. And within 3 hours, then I ran into a vice president of nonprofit banking for the bank. And he said, actually, he says, I think I saw you speaking. This is another one of my rules about speak anywhere that anyone wants you to like chip in, participate, hang out in communities, tell your story. And I had spoken at a library to a group of people, nonprofits that were trying to figure out how to raise money for their charities using the internet. So I came out to speak to them and just to volunteer and to run a session. Well, little did I know that the vice president of nonprofit banking for Royal Bank in Canada had been in the crowd. So here I was with him in the elevator, and he said, I saw you do that session at the library in Mississauga like a couple of weeks ago, didn't I? And I was like, yeah, that was me. He said, I really appreciate that you took the time to come out and help the charities in the country like that. So he goes, come with me. And he took me up to the 20th floor to Knowledge Based Industries, walked me into the vice president, and did $100,000 line of credit with no
Yeah.
business plan and no financial statements.
The interesting thing, I think, there's several things about the story. I think one of the very interesting things is that notion when you're an actor is there are no small parts. Every opportunity is an opportunity that could change the future for you as a founder, and often you don't even know about it. I remember the largest investor that ever invested in one of my companies, I didn't even know was an investor. I thought that they were actually just interested in signing up for one of our products, and it turned out to be $1 million check at the end of that day. So,
Mm.
one of those crazy things. The other aspect is the lengths a founder will go to in order to make things happen. You've dealt with so many founders. I mean, can you talk a little bit about what it really takes and what is separating, these serial founders from, everyone else? Because most people aren't going to just jump on an elevator and do what you did.
Yeah, I think of the, like, and as is mentioned when you did the intro, I've invested in a number of different companies, and the nice part when your intro is read is that you get all the most successful companies that are read out. You can look up the story of, like, Blade, or see what Ollie is doing these days, or Advisor Stream being sold last spring, and all these things are awesome. But there's also a whole list of company names that aren't on my LinkedIn profile that are companies that I invested in or was advising that didn't go to where they could have gone. Right. So people often ask me, like, what are the things that separate those two groups? Right. Now, of course, sometimes there's just like random misfortune and thunderbolts from the sky from Zeus that take out a company. And so, like, it's not everyone falls into these categories. But if I look at those investments and look at those companies, I would say that the ones that are successful have two foundational traits. Right. And now I look for this in the people that I'm meeting with. One is the fearlessness that I just described. Like if I think through all those people that are like succeeding, their willingness and fearlessness to jump on a plane, go to wherever, meet, find a way to get that introduction and say, I'm going to go find that person, I'm going to get
Yeah.
to them. And I think we all understand that as like a key trait that's important to have. But the one that's more nuanced, and I've actually valued more and more over time, is the ability to listen.
Yeah.
And if I think about the group that have been successful, that whether I've been whether I've invested in them or I'm just advising them and guiding them, and I think of the group that, like, is like now nowhere to be seen, the founder's ability to listen is a fundamental game changer. Because, and I look for that when I meet with people, because if they can't listen, right now, it doesn't mean they should do everything I say, or it doesn't mean they should do everything that someone else says, but they got to be able to listen. They got to be able to reflect on it. They got to be able to take it in, build on it, play around with the idea that I've thrown out, or the question, think about it, add to it, pass it back to me, ask me another question. Because that act of like playing and enjoying and being open to information and like micro learning on the fly in the moment is actually going to be indicative of their ability to hear the market, understand what the customer is saying to them, knowing whether the ad campaign that they really love and fell in love with is actually working or not, and being open to understanding that it isn't, knowing like what their staff and employees are saying to them and what they need and what motivates them, inspires them, being able to listen to investors. And is it the person who like just makes charges ahead and makes every decision on their own? Or is it someone like my friend Kevin Mulhern, who, the CEO of AdvisorStream, acquired by Broadridge last spring, who called me up at like the middle of the night and said, I have a question. And it's just like, hey, I'm going into this meeting tomorrow and it's going to kind of go like this or like this. Did you ever face this before? Right? Like that, because that
Yeah.
listening and that desire to listen it just is going to make an impact 100 times a day on how that leader leads within the company and how people feel about telling them the truth and actually engaging with them. So like that's the big divider. And the people I've seen who can't take that, I've learned not to fall in love with ideas anymore. There's some ideas that I invested in that to this day I love.
Yeah.
Or I saw them be like absolute unicorn home runs 4 years later. But I didn't listen to my gut in terms of whether the entrepreneur was capable of listening or not.
Well, and I think that that's a really, really interesting point because, I've gotten so much advice from you. Changing my profile pic was, I used to have this animation that I viewed it as part of my brand. And Chris just reached out to me one day and he said, dude, you got to grow up, change it. And I listened to him. I actually did a bit of a poll, and I realized not only was he telling me the right thing, my wife also said, "Yeah, it's about time somebody told you." So my wife really validated that
and to
also.
give credit for that, right? That again, being open and people knowing you're open to listening. It was a member of the Schulich startups community, Vito Giovanetti, who works with me, who's so bright and so brilliant in what he does and really thinks about these things. He came to me and he said, one thing about eQuo, you got to tell Barry to change his profile picture because he stands for transparency and openness. And if we could really see that he's a real human as opposed to just a cartoon image, we would connect with him more and know who he was. So,
Yeah.
and I passed that along and you tested it and listened, right? So those are like, and that's not like a make or break moment in eQuo, but it's one of 1,000 micro moments in the journey that you will be able to hear and listen to and be able to evolve. And I think it's especially important because with eQuo, you and we are building a community that involves so many groups and people from different walks and experiences and backgrounds and of life that being able to listen is very important. Yeah. Now I know there's founders out there that will say like, well, does like, the founder of XYZ unicorn company listen, or do they charge ahead with their own agenda, right? I don't know. I don't know them well enough to know whether they're just, here's a persona. But what I would say is like people get too locked into examples of entrepreneurship that are big stories of huge personalities that like, and then we don't need everyone to think that, with all due respect, that Elon Musk is like the icon of how every entrepreneur should behave, or that Mark Zuckerberg is the icon, or that Steve Jobs, or that, because the truth is that these, the number of unicorn companies that are in the world that actually make that path and follow that path are actually, I consider some of these things to be like statistically irrelevant because there's like so few of them. And compared to all the companies in the world that are working at these earlier stages and have different types of paths and horizons, I look at them and if you listen to what I'm trying to say when I say this, to me, they don't even exist. They don't exist as something to compare ourselves against. They don't exist as something to hold ourselves up against. We need to like actually learn and understand what are the right, kind of like models and people and experiences and company paths that relate to us, and not get into this world where we're holding ourselves against things where people are achieving by being like bulls in a china shop or not listening, or because like, that's not my experience in terms of what wins. It may win in a company that gets turned into a movie one day, but that's not statistically what wins.
Well, I think the other component about this, and it was one of the key motivators behind eQuo was, you know, the unicorns are unicorns for a reason. They're so rare. The vast majority of companies aren't those things. They're not being run by these egotistical, crazy founders. And in fact, so many of the founders that are running small businesses, and that's the other thing. What's small? You've got companies like Love Good Fats, who we did Susie York, 0 to 100 million in 6 years. Blade, you introduced me to the team. They're fantastic, 0 to 56 million in 4 years. But they're in industries that aren't normal. So, what is your thought on the ecosystem? And I'm also just going to say to everybody out there, there's Q&As. So feel free, ask some questions either in the chat or in the Q&A, and Jennifer Crowley is going to help moderate. We're going to open that up shortly. But back to that question, I know you have had extensive experience in the ecosystem. You've seen all these different companies. What is your take on really what is driving the ecosystem right now? Because to hear everybody else talk about it, it's all of these tech hubs that are all running for billion-dollar valuations, and they all seem to be getting every ounce of funding and support that they need just by asking for it.
Yeah. So I think what I want to say about that is that I think that an ecosystem, everybody likes things to be simple, or politicians like things to be simple, funders like things to be simple. But I think that, we've lost, and I think eQuo is trying to bring back the ability to see like a duality of greatness. So it's not about putting one over the other, although we are right now, which is that we're putting the unicorn path as what defines greatness, what defines success, right? How many people actually would realize, what in some of the scenarios where those companies get sold, like there are scenarios where the founders do incredibly well and give back to the community and, maintain their staff within the country. And, it's a great thing. I mean, look at like the Lau family and what they've done with Wattpad and what they represent to the community. I have deep respect for them. But there's also like a lot of stories that you don't hear about that are companies where it got sold, but where the founder actually doesn't have a lot left at the table by the time it gets sold, right? Yeah. Or where the company or the IP is like swept up, into like some other global corporate existence, as opposed to still being here to be true to its roots in Canada. And there's lots of versions of how that works, good or bad. Yeah. But it's just being able to recognize and talk openly about that both those paths are there, as opposed to every unicorn is at this, every unicorn produces that, every unicorn is here. Now, there's a group of like very like caring and very like, influential people within the ecosystem who are driven off of the perspective that what we need is another 100 unicorns, and that is what changes everything. Yeah. And so I don't want to say that's wrong to be pursuing that path. And I want to be like open and truthful in terms of like who I am, in that would I be happy to invest in a next unicorn company? And for sure, yeah, that's great. But what has been lost in terms of this like fixation on this one path, this one, persona, this one outcome of what success is the importance of, a 10,000, emerging companies across the country that are small businesses. Or I know lots of incredible entrepreneurs and founders who have companies that, again, I don't know their exact revenues, but I'm going to say, based on my estimation and guess, are like sub $20 million revenue companies, but employ like incredible people, are doing amazing things in the community. They're not on a path to like, to just go off and try to like rocket it into a sale. And they're spinning out other companies and creating new innovation and investing in other people. And they're beautiful.
Yeah.
They're beautiful companies. Like, look at like, someone who we both know in Pavan Maladi, right? From QA Tech and his multiple businesses and what he does with archangels and what he gives back to, like, within our world at Schulich, within eQuo, with the school. Like, these are these are amazing people. And it's not just a $100 million run that defines leadership within the ecosystem, that is creating jobs within the economy. So I would just like us to like get to like a path where these two worlds are respected. Now, let me give you an example of how this like manifests itself into the ecosystem in terms of how education is done or accelerators are done, right? So, for example, like, everything is like leaned in on raise money, get money from VCs. That's the whole outcome of like not all, but like a vast majority of these programs. It's just to train you to go raise money.
Yeah.
How many of these programs are actually training you to like go make sales and really find customers and understand how to like sit in front of them? And like, with a lot of the companies that I've worked with, I've been like, I'm going to come to a sales meeting with you, and I'm going to sit with you, and I'm going to like watch. And then when we come back, I'm going to tell you all the moments where you advanced the sale and all the moments where you pulled it backwards and lost it. Right. And then we're going to reconstruct the meeting. And then next time you're going to do a different version of it. And then we're going to watch what happens as a result. Right. But these are valuable abilities. And, who's like actually looking at like creating talent management and talent nurturing greatness within the ecosystem, right? How many giant like unicorn emerging companies are out there with like brutal cultures and terrible talent management and that don't treat their people well at all, right?
Yeah.
Like, where's that within the ecosystem? Where's the path to say like creating these companies that are the 10 $20 million companies that aren't going to take a dollar of VC and want to build, and have deep roots in the community? Where's their path? So I think we've just become too myopic in terms of like what is success, and the government funding all gets driven towards these types of things. So I'd just like to see it balanced out and have like a reflection of both things as being super valuable within the economy and within the ecosystem.
Well, and I mean, you know me a long time, and anybody that's pretty much had more than one meeting with me usually heard me say I'm a big believer in the improv theory of yes and I think you're exactly right. We need startups, we need these scale ups, and we need to recognize that meaty middle. That's 90% of everybody else, and the interconnectedness of those design firms, UI shops, production houses who are building the Wealthsimple branding, who are helping Shopify advance their next merger and acquisition.
Let me give you a example of that right here today. Like right in the chat today, and in the audience, we have Hassan Arapov from Style Photos. Okay, now this business is an amazing business. It's a beautiful photo studio powered with technology that does the most the most comprehensive set of high performance shoots for e-commerce photography in the city.
Yeah.
Right now, this business is not at this stage, or in terms of how you would view it as a VC, is not like a big venture backed business where it's going to grow to be like a $300 million SaaS producing type business. But it's amazing business. It's real work. It's real innovation.
Yeah.
And it's growing, and it's creating jobs, and it grows year after year, bit by bit. And it's powering up e-commerce businesses in the city that without it wouldn't. And it's beautiful. And here's Hassan here today. And that I love that company, and I love that company being in the ecosystem. And the other companies and the government and accelerators and everyone around us should realize these big unicorn, companies that we're driving, they need Hassan, and they need Style Photos. So we shouldn't just be building up one type of company. We should be supporting those companies as well.
Well, and it goes back to what you were talking about also, that the marketing and the sales side of things. That one of the big differences in a lot of Canadian companies versus American companies, we tend to invest in R&D and the tech higher than Americans. Americans invest very heavily when it comes down to marketing and sales. So what's the natural result in marketing and sales? They're driving more revenue. They're hitting through those thresholds, which means they can also afford to make a few more mistakes as they're growing. And so you go back to the merchandising. What's the best way to improve your e-commerce business? Well, you start to understand what's actually involved in that merchandising, again, that marketing side. So what are some of the other things? And then Jennifer, want to just reach out and just see about any questions there. Now that we're at around 11:30, but what would you say are some of the key drivers that you think every entrepreneur needs to pay attention to in order to not necessarily become a unicorn, but certainly to drive further growth and create more stability in their company?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, we'll talk about a couple, but like one I'd like to talk about for sure that I hinted on a few moments ago
Yeah,
is on the talent side of things, right? Like really, a differentiator for me in a company and with a leader that I'm investing in is their ability to create a culture and create opportunities for people that retain them to the company and create growth within their career, create support within their lives, and an environment where they're heard and listened to. When I created Thin Data, and Slava, who I saw was here earlier, will remember this. When I created Thin Data with Chancellor, one of the things that the recruiters used to talk about is like, we tried. They'd see me at events and stuff like that. They'd say, "Look, we try to recruit people away from your company because you've got all this talent, but nobody will leave."
yeah,
And they're like, "We're offering them like more money and like this, and like we don't understand, right?" But those things were like, actually like, making sure that everybody understood their purpose. Like, so for example, when a new group of people, as we were growing, like say 5 people had been hired that month, right? Then I would take those 5 people across the street, sit them down, and we would have like a little private room and we would have lunch together. It would be like a 3 hour lunch. And I would tell them the story of the company from that first day where Chancellor and I had to go to his house to see the internet, right? I tell them the whole story of the company and all the key decisions. And then when the meeting was when I got to the end of the story, then I would look around the table and I would say, "Barry, that's why your role is so important. You're on the Aeroplan account, and you heard me talk about how the promise that I made to Aeroplan at the table that day when we closed the deal. You're holding that promise in your hands on my behalf, right?" And Asthma, I'm going to call it people from the chat. Asthma, you're working on Shoppers Drug Mart. This is what Shoppers Drug Mart. Remember the part in the story, right? Or hey, Amalia, you brought in to work on the QA team and lead that, and think about what that means to the clients when this happens, right?
yeah,
So understanding people's like purpose in the beginning, but continuing to communicate that and celebrate them. I talked about listening, so listening to them, and like a day didn't go by where I didn't walk the floor and check in with everybody, even when I had like 120 people that were there, right? And
yeah,
just like give a little check and see how they were doing, up, down, or sideways as things were going on. So I think that people should think more about talent and think more about communication and think more about like what it means to be a leader internally within the company and understand how people feel and what's being built, because ultimately that creates value, and not always just spend your life worrying about what the external forces or your latest your latest video post on LinkedIn is saying to the world, and thinking about like not just what it's saying to the world, but what is it saying to the people inside your company that are watching it as well too, in terms of how you operate. So I think like thinking about like people is like a real lost art. And the other one that we've talked about is just thinking about the on the sales and marketing side of things, and really I think the greatest piece so that's the internal, making sure you have a lot of what I like to talk about or think about is about finding balance in these things. So like finding the internal balance of understanding your people and really being with them and understanding what they're going through and being there for them. And then the external balance, right, is the one of the best pieces of advice when I was first starting out that I ever got. I went, and some of you may be aware, there's a business incubator in town, still exists to this day, called the Toronto Business Development Center. It was the very first business incubator, at least that I know of in the history of Toronto, was started by the city of Toronto. And it used to be down on King West. And so when I started my company with this like chancellor, with this like, this digital magazine, well, I had to go in and pitch. And we didn't have, I didn't have a laptop yet, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't have the internet at the Toronto Business Development Center. And there were no projectors, and it was like, people just standing up and talking. So I was like, how am I going to convince these people who don't even understand what the internet is at all, what a digital magazine is going to be? Yeah. So I brought a copy of Maclean's magazine. I pulled up my chair instead of standing away from them. I pulled my chair right up in front of the judges, sat at the table with them, and flipped through the magazine and explained how the magazine would work in the future. What if you touch this? And Jean Chrétien, you heard his whole speech in Parliament. What if you did this and the product arrived the next day at your house? Like this kind of like, and they were like, they don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but they could imagine it, right? So, but the best piece of advice I got in the room later that day when they gave us a brief kind of like seminar talk, we didn't know if we were in or out of the program yet, was that the head of the program said, he said, listen, I'm going to tell you 90% of you are all going to be dead within a year, right? And there's and nowadays we have like other types of support and other visions in terms of like how to, but back then, like, remember, no money, limited advice, not a lot of networks. And so like 90% gone in a year. And he said, this is what you need to know that I've learned over my 20 plus years of doing this, is that there's one rule as to why the companies who live and the companies that die. And he said the companies that die are the ones that love and convince themselves that their role is to be the greatest baker, the greatest carpenter, the greatest artist, the greatest computer programmer, go on in the history of their company. And that's how they center their role, and that's what they focus on. And within a year, they're dead, right? And he said, there's another group, and that's the group that's in the 10%. And they love all that about themselves, and they love all that about their inspiration. But they also realize that their leading goal is to become the greatest salesperson in the history of the organization. Yeah. And the day you wake up and realize that whatever you came with here today, that your role is to be the greatest salesperson in the history of your organization, then you'll realize that you're on the beginning stages in your path to survival and then eventually to growth. And so a year in, our company was like flailing and floundering, and we didn't have any money, and we weren't doing. And then I actually like said to myself, you know what? I'm going to listen to that guy. And we started, every time we met someone, we like wrote down like a name on the card, like what we thought they needed, what we could sell them, how much we thought we could sell them for, what was the next step. We had this is all pre-Salesforce. We had the room in our office with cards taped all over the wall. We would move them from cold to cool to warm to hot to scalding to like closed, kind of thing around the room, and talk about them every day. And I also perfected over time my ability to pitch, my ability to present. I was a terrible presenter. Like the first presentation I ever did, sales presentation, it was to Microsoft, and it was on behalf of one of our clients, the iWeekly magazine, if any of you remember. It was such a bad presentation, and I was 100% sure we had lost it. But the guy who was the VP from Microsoft gave us the contract. It was only $10,000, but gave us the contract. I then walked home from the iWeekly's offices at Spadina and King all the way to Pape and Danforth in the East End, just replaying the meeting. And I told myself, I will never have that happen again. I will teach myself to be a great communicator, a great presenter, a great salesperson. And I brought that in. So I think we have to, that as we're emerging entrepreneurs, we have to like really embrace that part of our role and get comfortable with that being there. Now, I'll tell you a little secret that not a lot of people know. I met that guy many years later from Microsoft. At that time, his name's Jordan. At that time, he may be retired now, but at that time, he had risen to become the chief marketing officer for Microsoft in Canada.
Yeah.
And I met him at an event, and I asked him, like, why did you give us the contract? It was the worst pitch in the history of pitches, the worst sales pitch ever. And you know what he said? He said, Chris, I was so worried for you. I thought you were going to be fired that day. And I thought, we're Microsoft. We can afford to give you $10,000 and just a little bit of kindness. So that's the last thing as well, too, is just to think about, like, as you're going through your business life, just continue to keep, like, have an open heart. There was a guy thinking about an entrepreneur who was like in one of the most powerful positions in the country at that time for marketing. And he was just thinking, I got to give this guy a chance. Maybe he'll figure it out. I can write the check for $10,000. And that was it. He thought he was going to get fired, and that's why we got the job. But it's that, how do you think and communicate and listen internally? How do you do the same externally? Become a great leader of your people, become a great communicator to the market. Those are the foundational points. And of course, if you're building a tech company, there's all kinds of different things around product and all this kind of stuff. But like at the foundation of who you are as a leader, I think that's important.
I think that's all great advice. One thing, threading a few things that you said as well, and then there's some questions I'm going to jump into with the audience. When I was building Dashboard, all the other agency owners, they'd be, obviously taking the president out for dinner. They'd be taking the marketing directors out for dinner. And I was doing that too. But one of the things that I ensured that I did from day one was I spent a lot of time taking the assistant brand managers out, talking with them, just getting to know them. And I was doing it because I wanted to learn about the business. There was all of that to it. But the other aspect was they got promoted so quickly. The fact that one of the agency owners was spending time with them and getting to know them and trying to figure out how to help them, that they immediately wanted me to be one of the agencies that was working on. So for everybody, all the founders out there, sales isn't just when you're pitching. Sales is a longer term game, and it's building relationships, honestly. And if you start doing that, it may take a year, it may take 2 years, it may take 3 years, but you're going to have such a vast network that your company will have natural lift.
You know who else you should spend time with? Your competitors. And I had a mentor who said to me, like, one day when I was very young, said, like, how often do you meet with your competitors? And I was like, my competitors? I don't meet with my competitors. I'm trying to stop my competitors. I'm trying to this, I'm trying to that. He goes, this is very foolish. You should be like meeting with your competitors, like one of them every month, and sitting down and talking to them and exchanging views and opinions, because there's a giant market and you're all young companies and there's more than enough opportunity, and you would go further faster. And my most extreme version of that is that I became friends with the founder of the largest at that time email marketing services provider in Baltimore, and covered a big part of the Eastern United States. And his name's Greg Cangelosi. And so Greg and I met at a conference, and we started hanging out, and we crafted this plan. I was like, I have this proposal. You're focused in the States in this area, and that's your market. How many customers do you have in Canada? And he says, like, I only have a couple. And I was like, look, I'm not really focused on the States. I'm really focused on Canada, and that's where I'm dominating. What if every month you and I meet together online and we exchange all of our information, our marketing information, our sales data, like what's happening, our product roadmap, everything in the platform, and we share what's working and what's not. And whatever I'm working on or you're working on, we'll learn faster together, and our companies will grow faster, but we're not really in competition, even though we kind of are.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And both of our companies like took off to a whole other level, right? Yeah, those conversations are very important.
No, that's fantastic. I'm going to jump to a couple of questions. One here's from Ellie. Would you recommend getting an MBA degree still to go further in your career? And for an entrepreneur, does it matter, or is it still relevant what designations come after your name? And does it help people take you more seriously? What are your thoughts given your role today?
Of course, come and ask the head of innovation and entrepreneurship for the Schulich School of Business about the MBA program. Here's what I'll say about that is that it really depends on you, right, and what you need and what will give you the confidence and the grounding. I wouldn't look at it, if you're an entrepreneur, I wouldn't look at as like needing it as an external badge that will have like like an investor or a venture leader take you more seriously. I think they take you as a human being seriously. They take what you know seriously. They take your ideas, they take your courage, they take your openness, they take your like concept and the people you've rallied around your idea. If you have an MBA, cool, right? Now, if you as a person feel that there's a whole set of deeper business concepts that you need to learn around financial statements and projections and like marketing and market research and all these things, and you want to learn at a depth that is not like the accelerators teach. The accelerators are going to teach you, and they're great, they're cool, there's so many amazing programs, right? And we have them too at York University. But they're going to teach you, they're going to lean in heavily onto two things: product, right? Probably not as deep or hard as they should, but they're going to do product because they're going to want you to get like a product market fit right in the MVP stage. And they're going to teach you how to stand up and pitch for money with VCs, right? VCs are judges. But there's a million elements of business and scaling a business and managing a business and governing a business and financials and all these things that they are not going to teach you. And you're going to have to scrap together on your own or pay accountants or lawyers or advisors or hire people around that. So I see a lot of people who have taken their business degree, whether it's their, if they're very young, their undergrad or their MBA or their executive MBA, and I can see it making a huge impact. I mean, Pavan Muladi, who I have incredible respect for and has built amazing things, came and did his executive MBA at Schulich because he wanted to add another layer of perspective and network into the picture beyond what he had already figured out on his own. And that's the other thing to think about when you're doing your MBA. Then the network that you acquire from your classmates and the alumni is a powerful force, right? Like Blade had two of its earliest stage investors were Schulich alumni who wrote nice sized checks to get them out of the gate, right? So that's the other element of it. But is it a mandatory? No. Can it be powerful, and does it have purpose in certain reasons? Yes.
And I'd add one thought too, that because my daughter's just going to be going into undergraduate school, so not quite at the MBA. I think too often we're looking at school as being this transactional item, and we've forgotten this is also about learning. And at the end of the day, I don't care what founder you are, you're going to have a hell of a lot to learn that you're going to be able to acquire for basic fundamentals of running a company through a program like what Schulich offers. One question here from, and forgive me if I get this wrong, is Shravats Modi. And this is actually an eQuo, so maybe it'll be kind of a combination of Chris and I answering this. And they write, in my experience of raising a seed round for my startup, I learned that finding the right personnel to invest in your venture is almost as important as the amount itself. What are some of the screening processes used by eQuo that investors must go through before being approved to invest? What types of investments do most startups collaborating with eQuo seek, and are they mostly equity-based? So the starting point, I'm just going to clarify what eQuo is. eQuo is not making the investments directly. We are a matchmaking platform. What we're doing is we're connecting founders, mainly small businesses, but small businesses can have very large revenue amounts. What we're doing is we're connecting them with accredited investors as well as basically retail investors through crowdfunding and fintech and other capital solutions. Because at the end of the day, founders really are having trouble getting the capital. They're having trouble managing cash flow, all of these things. It's not just about investments. So what we're doing is we're using an algorithm to find out exactly what the entrepreneur does, what the founder composition is, what they're looking for. We match them to all these alternatives, whether they're family offices, whether they're angel investors, whether they're companies that are participating in crowdfunding, whether they're invoice factoring companies, alternative credit cards, alternative banking solutions, etc. So that's what we do. Now, we are doing a crowdfunding with one of our partners, which is Front Funder. They are a securities regulated platform. So they actually do the vetting for anybody investing directly into eQuo. And most of the other platforms that go through have some form of similar vesting as well. Anything you want to add into that, Chris?
No, I mean, you did a great job of covering the equal perspective. Um, and, we talk about screening processes. I just want to like expand for the group. I think that the comment here from Sravats is really important, that
Yeah.
finding the right people to invest is as important as he says, or they say, in terms of the amount itself, and is very true, right? Like you need to have people that you want to you need to think about what you want. If you want to be driven on a path, and your ultimate goal is like to absolutely maximize your exit at all costs, then maybe there's a type of investor that you're with. If there's an investor that or if you have a path that you see like as like there being other key considerations for your company related to like ask yourself, like, let me give you a fundamental question, like you should ask, like, if you as a founder had a check on the table for $50 million, right, and everybody in the company got fired the next day, or $40 million and everybody had their jobs guaranteed for the next 5 years and beyond, which check would you pick up? Now ask yourself what your investors are going to do, right? Because there's the moment where you're going to come into like, either harmony or conflict with your investors. I once went to my lead investor originally in Thin Data was Derek Rushton, who is the just gentleman chairman, leader of the Environics group of companies, the big public polling firm. And I had an opportunity where someone had come and approached us about selling the business, right? And I thought, I was like, this is the first time ever anyone had ever like talked to us about selling the company. And I almost felt like I need to go tell Derek, because this is like something I should disclose to him as the largest investor and the person who had led the round and put it together. And I came and I talked to him and I explained it, and the scenario and the situation in the company. And he looked at me and he said, Chris, do they have a better plan than we do? I said, no, absolutely not. I think we have like a deeper insight into where the market is going and how to grow the company. He said, okay. He said, would you have more fun working for them than working for yourself? I said, well, definitely not. Like, I love doing what I'm doing. And he said, well, Chris, thanks for coming and letting me know about that. So let's talk about the company and how everything's going. And he never even asked me how much they offered, right? Do they have a better plan? Would you have more fun? And then we kept building. We never talked about the price. Like that was the beauty of the relationship that I had with my investor group. And even when we sold the company, right, to Transcontinental, we had there were like 10, 11, 12 companies that came to see us. But we probably had maybe we had 3 or 4 that were like real concrete opportunities. And when we went into the room with some of the investors, Scott Bryan, who was one of the co-founders of Grocery Gateway, and Chancellor and a few of us in the leadership team, we did a whiteboard session where we wrote our exercise was the 10 things that would compel us to sell the company. And we said none of the things on the list of 10 could be the price. And then we said, let's agree that we won't sell until we get 8 of 10 of the things that are on the list. And there's some sacred items which cannot be. And like one of the items, first one we wrote on the board was nobody will go home and tell their family that they lost their job because we won and sold the company, period. And it was easy. When people came in, and there were big firms from the States, and they came in and they'd be in the room and they'd be like, okay, you know what's great about this, guys, is we have an ISP relations department and you have an ISP relations department. So we can like cut them in half and we'll make another $500,000 a year. So that's great. And we'd be like, out of the room, right? It's done. And we knew we had investors that would back up our values and back up what we believed in and back up what we wanted to get to at the end of the day. So I really think that it's a great point from our friend there, Shabats, in the chat, that who you're backing up. And you can have other values other than that. Maybe it is all money that is most important to you. But I know what was important for me, and so knowing what your investors believe in is super important.
There's a great question here by Asit Diva, and it's, how do you maintain your network? Because every relationship needs time, irrespective of any transactional need. But when your network grows, the ability to talk and connect to everyone shrinks. So time's the one thing that we can't change. We all have the same amount of. And you're the ultimate networker, Chris. How do you approach it?
How do I maintain my network? Okay. So one of the things that I've always maintained the principle of is that I'm going to meet, and this is about like cumulative effect, right? I mean, think of this as the version of like, if someone were to tell you like, how do you get big muscles or whatever, they would say, well, it's consistency. It's like, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's a consistency. So why do I have a network that is like, cool and amazing and full of great people and takes me into all kinds of places? Is because guaranteed every week of my life, I have made time to meet 4 to 5 people that don't know who they are, right? And that pace, since I was like in my early 20s of doing that, has opened a million doors. Number 2 is that every person that I meet, I'm thinking about, who else can I introduce them to? What can I do to like, assist them? Or what can be like something that could be like of like real like game changer or impact for them along the way. So I'm, have taken that mentality. So, for sure, if you add up that like pace of like 5 people a week across like, a career that's now gone from my early 20s to now I'm 50 years old, there are a lot of people out there that I've helped. And those people have grown to really interesting positions along their own careers and their paths. And now those are the people that I call on behalf of new people and say, hey, and they remember that they had like a favor like that in an introduction early on in their lives as well too. So it's all kind of like, it's all interconnected. And in terms of like, like, well, how do I keep up that pace of like, time and reach people? Eventually you get the benefit of having like a voice that goes beyond individual interactions, because your voice is like stories. Your voice is like, so like people will like have a story. Hopefully, you'll remember like whether it was the bank story today or sitting down and like actually cooperating with a geographically distant competitor or something, and you'll take that away and you'll tell it to other people and like share that. And so I like to think that my voice and my network is like also propagating my values and my beliefs and my stories and my methods and that kind of thing, and that they're being passed along and being handed in through my students that work with me and go on and build their companies or build their careers, that hopefully they're taking away a couple of those things and then they're passing it along. And so like my essence of like helping people and like being passionate about supporting entrepreneurs is getting infused into other places, and it's existing in different little ways all around the city today, even though I'm not in those rooms. So that's how I kind of like view it over time, in terms of the network is like kind of like it's its own thing, but in part it gets infused with some of me as well too, in terms of what I think and what I want to see done.
I'm going to add one thing that connects with your earlier comment about being nice, and then we're going to need to close things up. And it is, great people never are down for long, and everybody at some point gets knocked down. So when you see great people out there who get knocked down, whether you know them or you don't know them, reach out, extend that nicety. They're going to remember it. I can't tell you how many people that I've seen who had generated tens of millions of dollars. Suddenly they had the rug pulled out from under them. And I just reached out just to say, hey, you're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. Trust me, they rebound. And in those moments, they really need to hear these things too. So part of the network.
Hey, Barry, there's a guy who, like, we'll say like 5, 6 years ago now, was leading like a major country office in Canada for a business that pulled out of the country. And the day that it pulled out of the country, I messaged him. I only ever met him once before. I messaged him and told him I saw that they pulled out of the country. If you're looking for your next thing, let me know. If I can introduce you to anyone, if I know anyone, let me see if I can help you out. He never replied, right? Because he had a lot on his plate.
Yeah.
But 6 years later, 7 years later, whatever it might have been, he showed up, and he like had an incredible opportunity that he came and offered for me to give to one of my students. And it created an opportunity. Now, this guy, many years later, is now like a senior leader in the largest venture capital company in the planet. And he came with a business that they needed a leader for. And he said, Chris, I need a graduating MBA who has this, who has this, who has this, and speaks Hindi. And I figured you know the guy or girl or person, right? And so I found that person for them. And when he brought that, he was like, oh, and by the way, I never forget the day that you sent me the note, the day that the company pulled out of the country. But
Yeah.
he never even replied. So yeah, you should bring that. There were some comments on that in the chat. Like, you should bring that sense of like kindness and contribution. And we don't do these things for these reasons, but also you should know, as you live life and build your network, that doing good is not, mutually exclusive from having good brought to you.
Yeah.
They come together.
I'm going to give you the chance to have a final thought. Before I do that, I'd like to thank Chris, you for your time today. I would have never known that you were off this morning. You were absolutely on in the last hour. I want to thank everybody who's attended. I'd like to also ask, please go to equoshift.com and join eQuo, be part of this movement that we're creating. We intend to create a better ecosystem, more supportive of not just small business, but underestimated founders. So please go to equoshift.com. Chris, final thoughts that you'd like to leave everybody of all the things that you've done, you've learned. What would you like to just say to anybody that's looking at either becoming a founder or just thinking about what they should be doing in their own career as the next move?
Yeah, I'm going to spend my final moment just to say a word about eQuo, and that why I think it's really important and really valuable, the work that you're doing, why I've invested in it myself, and helping out as an advisor, is that I think that being an entrepreneur is like has many moments where it is lonely. It's a roller coaster of up and down, and you really need to have a community of people over time that you either you kind of like manufacture this network over time, or you find your way into it. And here, what I'm inspired by is that eQuo is building this network around people who believe in small business with big aspirations or big heart or big community desire, whatever it is that is their big within the world of their small business. And I'm really happy to see this continuing to build and grow. And thanks to everyone for their time here today. I hope if you could do one thing, if you have 3 or 4 people that are small business entrepreneurs or young emerging entrepreneurs or old emerging entrepreneurs that you think would be a great member of this community, to send them the link and the information and tell them to check it out. Maybe you give when we post this article up today in this broadcast, you give it a reshare on LinkedIn or a retweet, and suggest to other entrepreneurs to get signed up, because we want to draw great people with big hearts and a lot of goals to the community, so we can all help each other out.
So on that note, I know you've got to jump to a board meeting, Chris. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And have a fantastic day and a great weekend.